Hello, I'm Susan Kahn. I'm the author of Reinvent Yourself. We're going to be talking about that today. But before we begin, happiness for me is being at ease in myself, whether that's when I've made a big mistake or whether it's when I'm on top of the world, but being able to accept myself. That for me is happiness.
I love that. Accepting yourself is happiness. That's
Oh.
beautiful, Susan. So, when did that become happiness for you? How like did you realize that long ago, or is that a new revelation?
Well, I think that I've always worked hard on getting to know myself, which might sound a little bit self indulgent, but is really about just understanding what it is that drives me. And I think also quite a lot of painful times of feeling that I am just, I'm making loads of mistakes, that I'm upsetting people, that I'm getting things wrong. And so that sort of ease of accepting that it's okay. Whatever you do, it's okay. You can rectify, you can do your best, and that peace that comes with self-acceptance is then something which allows you to go on and make others happy and to do meaningful things and to live a full life. So that's at the heart of it.
I love that. I love that. Well, congrats on a wonderful book,
Oh, thank
Reinvent
you.
Yourself: Psychological Insights that will transform your work life. Beautiful book. Lots of great stuff inside here. We could talk about any of it, but today I want to talk about vulnerability because I think
Yeah,
that's important. And you were just vulnerable right there when you
yeah.
shared about that. So, why be vulnerable? Why is that important?
Mm. Well, I think sometimes we imagine that to be successful, to be the person that other people want to be around, we need to present ourselves as fabulous and talented and entertaining and well read. And when we do encounter these individuals that seem to have it all, rather than feeling that that is a true human being, what we tend to feel is that that's perhaps a bit fabricated, that that's not kind of natural. But when we reveal a little of our vulnerability, when we actually see that, as with all human beings, we're all flawed, we're all frail, we all have moments where we don't feel we're the very best that we could be. We're able to make connections. We're able to ideally inspire people as well by recognizing that as humanity, we have so much in common, including the fact that we do fail, we do muck up, we do make mistakes. So I'm very drawn to vulnerability, not in the sense of depleting vulnerability that means that you can't sort of get out of bed in the morning, which of course is something terribly tough to deal with, but that our encounters shouldn't be about presenting our perfect selves, that we should be able to say, I struggled with that, or I didn't always find that easy. And that allows you, I think, to connect at a much deeper human level.
Yeah, I think so too. I think so too. So you mentioned that people that show as always polished, if you will, they're not connectable. They don't seem real. And I can tell you that I see that a lot. Like we think
Yeah.
about the our favorite movie stars, Robert Downey
Mhm.
Jr., perfect
Yeah.
example, right? We think about the stuff that he did before he became Iron Man. And it's like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, like that makes him even more of a superhero to me anyway. So why do so many people then front and they feel like they can't share that?
Mm. Well, I think that getting to know yourself is something which is a sort of a lifetime's work, and the acceptance of our flawed selves starts first with our relationship internally. That if I can't face myself and accept myself as someone who is often wrong or gets things, you know upset or difficult, as indeed we did, Phil, on our first meeting when I made a mistake, and you so generously sort of forgave me, then I think that we begin to then impose that on other people. So, first of all, we need to accept ourselves as being flawed. And then we can have the generosity to look at others and think, they're like me. They're also individuals who are not perfect. But I will say there is something very appealing about projecting perfection into others. When we see a beautiful movie star or a deeply talented individual or somebody who's enormously clever or somebody who's won a Nobel Peace Prize or something like that, we look at them and we just think they have everything. And there's something about that which is, almost kind of awe-inspiring, and we quite enjoy having that in our lives. But of course, even the most awe-inspiring of individuals can be difficult, grumpy, annoying. They're never the whole package. Well, very few people, I think, meet that. You might have your own heroes who fall into that category. I don't know.
Yeah, well, so I think that's interesting, right? Because I do think that is often appealing because and we hear, never meet your heroes because you'll
Yes.
realize that they're normal people just
Mm,
like you and I, but I prefer the normal person. I don't get starstruck with
yeah.
people because I know that, they're not not only are they like me in the fact that right, they put their pants on one leg at a time, the old saying, but really that they've made mistakes as well. So anybody, I guess maybe I'm a weirdo in the fact that anybody that seems too perfect for me, I'm like, yeah, I don't even want to talk to that person. That doesn't seem like any sort of connection there. Is that weird or is that normal or
I,
and,
I
and it's
think
okay.
I think that you're grounded, and so you can take that attitude because you know yourself and you're at ease with yourself. I think that it's not something that lots of people might think. There's that sort of sense of kind of adoration that goes along with it. But what probably we find hard to also accept that some people might look at us and think, oh gosh, they've got it all sorted. Phil's got a podcast, he's a writer, he's got an amazing number of followers. I'm a bit in awe of him. And yet it just depends where we are at different times in our lives. We'll always have that sort of sense of kind of wonder, which is great, but also to pull back to the sense that at our most basic, we are all very alike. We all are living, breathing creatures who make mistakes.
Yeah, absolutely. We are absolutely now vulnerability can sometimes go too far. I've seen
Yeah.
people, like I've heard the if you're still bleeding, now's not the time to share it. So, but what that means is right if you haven't processed the miss yet, it's not time to share it yet. And I certainly have found that. I've certainly got mistakes that happened maybe yesterday or last month
Yeah.
that I'm like I'm still trying to process through, trying to learn what the lesson is from there. How can vulnerability go wrong?
I think that the description of the bleeding wound is a wonderful one. And I think that often when I'm working with groups and clients, I talk about revealing your scars, not your wounds,
Oh,
because sometimes there's a process of healing that you need to do in a psychologically safe space with those that you trust, that you can kind of process yourself in order to then be able to speak about it. So I think that that recognition internally about when it is safe to be vulnerable is an important lesson to learn. Um, I also think there's a sort of a potential, not always, but a potential to almost kind of, excuse the language, vomit out your vulnerability, to literally tell everything there is about your flawed self. And I think that's really also not necessarily the appropriate thing in some audiences. Yes, with your therapist, yes, with your best friend, yes, with your trusted advisor, maybe with your partner, but we can be selective. So I think it can go wrong. If we met for the first time and I started talking to you about my bad back and my relationship breakdowns and the difficulties I've got with my children, you'd probably think, oh, let's back off here, let's not continue talking. But in time, when one appropriately reveals challenges, then that can prove to be a very bonding experience, that you can then sort of share your own experiences of relationships that have gone wrong or ailments. So I think it's something that we need to take a measure of, and also look at cues of other people. When people start glazing over, I think you need to start thinking about shifting the topic.
Yeah, for sure. Well, that phrase there, reveal your scars, not your wounds, I think
Mhm.
is a great reminder, because a scar is already healed over
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
already stronger than it
Yes,
was as a
exactly.
wound. So I think that's a beautiful reminder to us to do that. Now, do you find at all people are strategically vulnerable, like they are almost like fronting and trying to do that to connect, or do you think that happens authentically and people can just share?
Yeah. Well, it would be a little bit cynical to think that people were just revealing their vulnerability to create a bond with you. But I think that, if we think about dating, if we think about forming friendships, we do often sort of do this mirroring thing where, we'll talk about, oh, yeah, I've suffered like that, or yeah, I've been disappointed like that. So I do think there is a sort of a human tendency to try and match and show compassion for the other's suffering, perhaps by revealing something of yourself. But there's also sort of degrees. We find some extremely stoic people who have gone through incredible hardships, who don't see themselves as victims and don't see themselves as someone to feel sorry for in any way. So, self-regulation
Yeah,
is, I think, important. And also finding your tribe of people that you want to connect with, people that where it's a sort of a supportive environment, but also one which is energizing and creates sort of ideas and good dialogue, rather than that depleting conversation around how awful everything is.
absolutely. Absolutely. Well, in your book in chapter 8, you talk about that. You talk about
Ah,
building your support network. So let's talk about that. How do we do that? If we don't already have a good network in place, a good supportive network, how do we do that, Susan?
yeah, well, I think that having a tribe around you, having people around you to support you is so important for any reinvention, but also for sort of dealing with things we feel a bit fragile about. And some people are incredibly good at making connections. They might be individuals who are extremely extrovert, who are very good at asking the right questions, who are deeply curious. And there are others who need to work a little bit harder at establishing those connections. And I think that that particular chapter is written for those people who perhaps need to, refocus the way that they network and the way they connect. And it doesn't mean that you can only be good at connecting if you are a very extrovert individual. There are many introverts who are extremely good at creating meaningful bonds with people. But what I would encourage people to do is to think about it, not just stick to the echo chamber of those that we know. And I think that the way we communicate in the world today, certainly on social media, even in the people that we meet face to face, often we're surrounded by people who have the same opinion as us. They agree with us politically, they agree with us, morally, they agree with us perhaps in terms of our geopolitics. And in terms of building a good network, I would encourage people to look outside of their normal sphere. If you only liaise with people who are similar ages to you, find someone much older, find someone much younger, find someone in a different industry. and try and build a connection there. It could be just as simple as, a message that you exchange, or it could be just asking, could I have 15 minutes of your time? And most people are generous enough to give that.
Yeah.
Did I feel you
I
wanted to say something there, Phil?
No, I was just thinking about how important it is that we do connect with people different than us so we don't stay
Mm,
kind of locked in, right? If we want to grow, we have to be
yeah,
uncomfortable. We have
yeah,
to be willing to do
absolutely.
that, right? And if we want to reinvent ourselves, like you talk about in the book, right, we have to get uncomfortable. We can't
Absolutely.
just stay comfortable. So with that, right? So why did I'm just curious, why did you write the book?
Well, I was always interested in transition, in the idea that when we move from one phase to another, I studied anthropology as my first degree, and
Cool.
we talk a lot there about liminality, this idea of moving from childhood to adolescence, from adolescence to adulthood, from being, a normal member of the community to being an elder, and how during those periods of transition we go through a time where everything is up in the air, everything that we knew is kind of changed. And in my work as a sort of coach and a psychologist, I often found people at that point of flux, at that point of change. So I was just really curious about what keeps people stuck, what encourages people to have the courage to break out of their comfort zone and try something new. And that was why, the book came to be a sort of kind of a collection of beginnings and endings and reinventions, which inevitably will mean that we get uncomfortable
Yeah.
because that's how we do grow.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you mentioned chapter 5, you talk about the age of reinvention, about how this is the time that
Mm,
we can reinvent. So talk to me about now, right? I mean, I think now is a bit of a winter time. We're really seeing a lot of flux, and we're seeing people are kind of huddled close to
mm,
themselves. So talk to me about now and why now is a great time to break out and reinvent.
mm. Well, I think that if you're listening to this, if you're curious about the subject of reinvention, then I think now is the time to consider doing something. If you're talking about globally and socially, there's never been a better time to consider all the incredible opportunities available to us in terms of knowledge, in terms of technology, in terms of shifting ways of doing things. There's so much at our fingertips to allow us to create new opportunities. Jobs that we might not even have considered existing now do exist. So I think the chapter was about not restricting yourself by your biological age, nor the age of our times, so that you might look at something on paper as being 50-year-old male accountant. Okay, maybe you've got an image in mind of who that 50-year but it might well be that that 50-year-old male accountant has got a yearning to be a creative, that they have a fantastic mind for sort of technological change, that they maybe want to do fine art, or they want to do graphics, or they want, and why not? Why should they be restricted just because the first phase of their life has led them in one direction? So that chapter was really helping us to think about our biological age, our social age, and the age in which we're all functioning.
Wow. Wow, that's a lot there. And there's a lot in the book. I mean, there's so much goodness here, lots to think about, lots to get us going. Before I ask kind of a couple more last questions here, I want to encourage folks to get a copy of this. Go to
Oh,
drscahn.com. That's Dr. D-R-S for Susan, and then Kahn, Kahn.com. Check Susan out. She's got a lot of great stuff there. You can get a copy of the book. But Susan, as we think about this, there is so much here. So what chapter, maybe the inside your mind chapter might be one that we can talk a little
yeah.
bit more about, as we kind of get close to wrapping up here, what's one more that maybe we want to hone in on and help people as it relates to vulnerability and reinventing themselves?
Mm. Actually, I'm really glad you picked that topic, particularly as it's April 2024, and just a few days ago, Daniel Kahneman passed away. The great, yeah, he
Thinking
just
fast and
passed.
slow. Yeah. Wow.
Thinking Fast and Slow. And I think he was somebody who does feature in the book, but also taught us about the power of our minds to change, to allow us to think differently about things. And Thinking Fast and Slow obviously talked about the shortcuts that we make in our thinking. But if we could apply that to reinvention, what we often do is the same things because we know how to do them and they're easy and we can deliver without thinking too much. And I think that the purpose of reading this book about thinking about your reinvention is to actually think, right, is there another way I can go? Could I actually train my thinking to approach problems in a different way, to approach the way I work in a different way? And the incredible developments there have been in understanding our brain show us that it's really possible to create this neuroplasticity, to be able to literally rewire our brains. And that does begin with how we define ourselves. So being able to think of ourselves as someone that can do other things, that can think in different ways, that can be expansive rather than limiting in terms of what they do. So I think that I definitely mourn Daniel Kahneman, but really encourage anyone sort of thinking about exploring the topic even deeper to consider his work, because he's taught us so much about the way we think and logic and time and all the opportunities available to us.
Yeah, absolutely. He can hopefully he'll rest in peace knowing that his legacy is strong. Thinking Fast and Slow is a fantastic book, but so is your book, right? So the
Oh,
book is reinvent yourself, right? Reinvent yourself, psychological insights to transform your work life. You can go to drscon.com and get that. But Susan, if we want to get started along
yeah.
this journey of being vulnerable and
Mm.
reinventing ourselves, where should we start?
Mm. Well, I think perhaps to reflect a little on yourself. What are the moments that make you feel that you're presenting your full self rather than your authentic self? And can you maybe just press pause on that for a moment? The next time you go into a meeting and you're expected to have the answer to something that you don't know, rather than fluffing it, why don't you just say, I really don't know at the moment. I'm going to need to go away and find out. And allow yourself the space to reveal your vulnerability. And this applies to leaders as much as to those of us who are part of teams. And just see how that goes. See how well people respond to you revealing your true self.
Yeah, I love that. I don't know. Three very powerful words that can help us be more
Yeah.
vulnerable. I also want to encourage folks to remember what Susan said about revealing your scars, not
Mm.
your wounds. Really, really important. And get started today reinventing yourself. Get a copy of the book, Reinvent Yourself, get to know Susan Kahn more, and learn that vulnerability can actually make you even more powerful and even more strong. Thank you so much, Susan.
Thank you, Phil. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.